Some of the earliest signs of aging do not show up in the mirror, but they show up on the inside, long before you see any wrinkles or gray hair. And the gap between how old you are and how old your body behaves can be much bigger than most people realize. And I see this play out all the time. Yesterday, I saw 2 patients in my longevity clinic. One of them was 40 years old, and the other one was 65. You know, that age where, at least in the US, we consider that the start of the retirement age or Medicare age. And you would expect the 65-year-old to have the older biology. But our testing told a different story. The 40-year-old had slower healing and worse metabolic markers and lower muscle strength. And the 65-year-old had sharp cognition, faster recovery, and better metabolic markers than the 40-year-old. And this is what surprises a lot of people. The earliest signs of aging appear on the inside your blood vessels and in your muscles and in your metabolism and in your brain. So 2 people with the same age on paper can have decades of difference in their biological age. And the earlier you spot the warning signs, the easier it is to turn them around and reverse your biological age. So this is exactly what I want to show you in this video. The 5 earliest clues that your biological age is running ahead of the schedule. And as we go through these signs, you're going to notice a common thread that runs through a lot of these signs. Where you are on your biological age will really come down to how much resilience you've built into your systems, because the damage and the wear and tear are unavoidable. That's just part of life. But how much resilience and how much flexibility you're stacking on top of each other will determine how fast you age on the inside. Now, as we go through these signs and you're already noticing these markers of early biologic aging in your body, well, stick around to the end, because in the end, I'm going to give you a simple checklist that you can start today to help you stop and even reverse biologic aging in your body. All right, so clue number 1 is slower recovery from injury or from exercise. So if you notice that soreness lingers longer than it used to, or small injuries like an ankle sprain just takes weeks to settle down, whereas before it may have taken just a few days, well, that's one signal that your repair systems are just falling behind. Your body fixes microdamage every single day. It does that in the muscles and in your tendons, in your skin, even in your blood vessels. But when those repair pathways slow down, this is when the damage starts to accumulate and healing feels slower. And here's why this matters. Slower tissue repair is a red flag because it's one of the signs of an impaired immune function. So your immune system is not just about fighting infections, but it also coordinates tissue repair. So when the system doesn't work as well, it shifts into a low-grade inflammatory state where you just get too much inflammation that slows down your ability to patch up and fix the daily wear and tear. So in simple terms, your immune system or the cleanup crew just stays active longer than it needs to, which then delays full recovery. And you feel this long before you start seeing any other visible signs of aging. So the key question is this: are you healing slower because of the age, or because the systems that control repair are just not operating at full capacity? And for the vast majority of people, it's the latter, which is actually good news because we can fix it. And I'm going to talk about the steps you can take to fix this at the end of the video. Now, sign number 2 is brain fog, or just slower thinking. And this is another early clue that your biological age is moving faster than it should. So here's what I want you to pay attention to. If you notice that your focus drops faster during the day, or it takes more effort to switch between tasks, or if you need to reread things to process them, that's not normal aging. This is your brain telling you that something is off in the systems that protect your neurons. And here's what's happening underneath. Your brain runs on energy. In fact, the human brain consumes about 20 to 25% of your body's overall energy and oxygen capacity, even though it only represents about 2% of your total body weight. And our brains need a steady and predictable supply of energy. But when the supply becomes unstable, your neurons start to work less efficiently. So this will show up as mental fatigue or trouble concentrating. And there's 2 main drivers here. First is your glucose instability. Your brain depends on a constant and steady delivery of glucose. But if your blood sugar jumps and crashes throughout the day, even if it stays in the normal range, well, the brain's fuel delivery becomes very inconsistent. And neurons hate inconsistency. So you will feel that as brain fog, or irritability, or slower processing. And the second driver for this is impaired blood flow. Your brain also needs healthy blood vessels to deliver oxygen and nutrients with every heartbeat. But early vascular aging can stiffen those vessels and reduce the ability to increase blood flow when the brain demands it. So as that starts happening, you'll get less and less flexibility in your blood flow demands. So less oxygen and less nutrients means you get slower thinking. And this starts to show up long before any imaging shows a problem. So this is why it's so important to do all the stuff that we always talk about, like keeping your glucose levels in check, and lowering your ApoB or LDL, and lowering inflammation, and fixing your blood pressure as early as possible, because these are the main drivers of vascular disease and brain aging. All right, sign number 3 is declining daily energy. So this is not the I stayed up too late last night kind of tired, but what I'm talking about is the steady overall drop in the energy that you can generate and sustain throughout a normal day. So the way this usually plays out is you just feel a midday slump, even on the days you slept well, or you rely more and more on caffeine or energy drinks to get you through the day. And there could be many reasons for why this happens, like sleep apnea, or vitamin deficiencies, or anemia, or hormonal imbalance, like with perimenopause or low testosterone. But on the foundational level, your energy comes from one place, and that is your mitochondria. And your mitochondria are these engines inside your cells that convert food and oxygen into ATP, which is that molecule that powers every process in your body. And when your mitochondria becomes inefficient, you don't just feel tired. Every system that depends on energy, so your muscles, your brain, your immune function, and your hormones, all those systems slow down as well. And as we age, we need efficient mitochondria to give ourselves energy to rebuild collagen and repair muscle fibers and restore normal functions after stress. And this is incredibly important because it ties in so many organ systems that also affect your biological age. But the most important one is the next sign, which is your metabolic flexibility. So metabolic flexibility is your body's ability to switch between glucose and fat for energy generation, depending on what the moment demands. And when this system is healthy, you have stable energy throughout the day. But when the metabolic flexibility declines, well, this is when your body starts relying too much on glucose, which then leads to things like fat accumulation and insulin resistance and fatty liver, all the hallmarks of metabolic disease. So these metabolic issues tie in very closely to having low energy reserves, because if your body can only run well on glucose, well then any drop in glucose creates an energy crash, where you just feel fatigued and irritable. And this is that midday slump that a lot of people experience. But a healthy and a biologically young body should be able to switch from using glucose to using fat pretty smoothly if your glucose levels dip. But when metabolic flexibility breaks down, your system cannot make that shift. So you get into the cycle of spikes and drops, which then causes hunger and cravings for sweets or processed carbs. So this is when you get on that roller coaster of short bursts of energy and then big crashes. And the lower your metabolic flexibility, the sharper the crash. And over time, this creates a self-sustaining cycle of needing constant snacks to function and just feeling tired and fatigued between meals. And finally, sign number 5 that also ties into all the previous signs that we talked about is loss of muscle mass and strength. In fact, how much muscle you have is one of the strongest markers of your biological age. And it's so important because muscle is not just tissue for movement. Muscle is an active endocrine organ. It releases molecules that regulate inflammation and metabolism and even brain function. So when muscle mass drops, every system that depends on those signals starts to slip. Your muscle mass is often what determines how insulin sensitive you are. And that is because higher muscle mass makes it easier for your body to dispose of excess glucose. So this is where insulin resistance and that important concept of metabolic flexibility comes in. And the scary part about this is muscle loss usually starts long before you notice it. This is why with my longevity patients, we track muscle mass almost religiously with DEXA scans. Because once you start losing muscle, well then there goes your glucose control and your recovery, and you lose steady energy levels, and you lose your metabolism. And if you don't have an easy access to a DEXA scan nearby, well, this is when you can also track your strength as a proxy for your muscle mass. And the most steady parameter for that is your grip strength. And grip strength is actually one of the most reliable markers of longevity. We have multiple large-scale prospective studies that show that grip strength is a stronger predictor for all-cause mortality, which is death from any cause, than even systolic blood pressure and physical activity. Now, if you recognize any of these signs in yourself or in your family members, here are a few high-yield levers you can pull that will improve all 5 markers at the same time. First is you need to strength train at least 2 times per week to build and maintain the muscle mass. This will improve your insulin sensitivity and it will help speed up recovery from injury. And strength training doesn't have to involve complex exercises or doing any kind of specific workouts. Just focus on simple movements like pushing and pulling and squatting or carrying heavy weights. And then we move on to the next step, which is adding steady zone 2 cardio. And this will help you in several different ways. So zone 2 will improve your fat metabolism and it will increase your mitochondria and it will help improve blood flow to the brain. This is probably one of the most reliable ways to build that metabolic flexibility and reverse your biological age. And zone 2 cardio can be any kind of activity. It could be walking, or it could be cycling or rowing or swimming. The key here is effort and consistency and not the type of exercise. So whatever activity you pick, just find a pace where you're breathing steady and your heart rate rises and you're aiming for that exertion level where you feel like it's a little bit more difficult for you to talk, but you're still able to hold a full conversation. And you just aim for 20 to 40 minutes in that zone at least 3 to 5 days a week. Now that does require quite a bit more of a time commitment, especially if you combine it with strength training twice a week. So if you're pressed for time, you don't need to limit yourself to just zone 2 training. There's actually a lot of emerging evidence that shows that doing higher intensity exercise will still give you all the benefits, but in less time. There's a very interesting study that was published in Circulation in 2018, and it found that higher intensity training reversed the equivalent of 20 years of heart aging in just 2 years. So in the study, the participants' blood vessels became more elastic, and their blood pressure dropped, and their VO2 max increased by 18%. So the median age of the participants was 53, but after 2 years of higher intensity training, their cardiovascular profiles look more like those of 30-year-olds. So if you don't have a lot of time to spare, this is where I would recommend adding intensity and venturing into things like the Japanese interval walking training or the Norwegian 4x4 protocol. And I actually made a separate video on that, and I'm going to post a link to that in the description below. Now, another thing to add on the checklist is prioritizing whole foods with adequate protein and fiber intake. So protein is especially important as you age because it supports muscle synthesis and it helps with tissue repair. In fact, there's a large meta-analysis of 32 prospective cohort studies, and it found that higher protein intake was associated with up to 6% lower all-cause mortality. So this is death from any cause. And it was also associated with lower rates of death from cardiovascular disease. And finally, do not neglect sleep, because sleep is where your body does the bulk of its repair work. When sleep quality drops, every system that we talked about starts to slip. Your immune system resets during sleep. Sleep is where your inflammation gets regulated, and this is when your body clears out damaged cells and debris. So poor sleep keeps your immune system in a low-grade activated state, which then slows down tissue repair and makes recovery from injuries that much longer. And on top of all that, sleep is one of the strongest determinants of your metabolic flexibility, which encompasses insulin resistance and glucose control. We have studies that show that just one night of poor sleep lowers your insulin sensitivity by 20%. So you can have the perfect diet and the perfect exercise routine, but that may still not be enough if you don't get good sleep. So if you want to improve all 5 signs of early biological aging at the same time, improving your sleep is probably one of the highest yield steps you can take. Now, I'm working on making a separate video on fixing your sleep, but for most people, you just need to aim for consistent sleep and consistent wake times, and try to get at least 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night, and then try to get sunlight exposure first thing in the morning, and then try to avoid blue lights from electronics at least 1 to 2 hours before bedtime. And that alone will take you pretty far in improving your sleep quality. All right, I hope this was helpful. Stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next one.